Hello everyone. I apologise for the massive delay in my content. I will be working on videos shortly in the near future. Until then, please enjoy one of the first ever creepypastas I narrated. The audio quality may be a bit choppy here and there, and there is a moment where I sit down on my seat that causes a massive kind of, noise. You'll notice it when it happens. But, consider this as a teaser for what is to come. And if there is enough demand for it, I will make a remastered version of this creepypasta. Until then, put on your tinfoil hats. This is the Argentinian Incident.
In the winter of 1998, there was an undocumented wave of brutal murders that nearly wiped out the entire population of a small fishing village in Argentina. All evidence of the incident was swiftly swept under the rug by the local authorities, which then proceeded to set up massive roadblocks in Tamacon, preventing anyone from getting near the site of the murders. Media coverage of the police's suspicious activities was minimal, with most newspapers and local news channels labelling it as a large-scale evacuation on account of a fictitious fire hazard. The most bizarre part of the whole affair, however, was that after the gathering of the village's handful of survivors, government officials decided to unceremoniously institutionalize them in different high-security psychiatric wards scattered throughout the country. The reason behind this seemingly unwarranted institutionalizations was never made clear in public knowledge, but despite the Argentinian government's best efforts, rumors of the murders spread like wildfire across all of South America. 2 years later, an amateur film crew from Buenos Aires traveled to Tamacon to shoot a found footage documentary regarding the incident. "We wanted to film it like the Blair Witch Project," disclosed Gabriela del Carmo, the project's director of photography. The film had come out the year before, and everyone was still raving about it. "We wanted to do something similar, but scarier, creepier, with more blood and sinister interviews. Obviously, we had no idea what we were about to get ourselves into." Upon arriving at the remote fishing village, the crew wasn't surprised to find it completely abandoned. What they weren't expecting, however, was to discover that most of the buildings had been deliberately burnt to the ground. "You could tell that it hadn't been an accident," said the project's first assisting director, Rodrigo Elias, and that really shocked us, finding out the cops had deliberately torched the place. Of course, once we started piecing together what really made down there, hell, it made sense. I'm surprised it took that long to actually cover it up. With most of the survivors locked away, the crew was forced to travel to neighbouring towns and hamlets in search for more information. These weren't very successful, however. "No one wanted to talk about it," said Angelico Di Sosa, one of the project's executive producers. "Everyone was too scared to do it. The second we mentioned Tamacon, they would shut the door in our faces, literally as if it was illegal to talk about it. As if someone else was listening. We never spent more than a night in those strange little towns. The townsfolk would always throw us out the next morning, and every time they did it, it felt like they were doing us for a favour, as if it was for our own safety." After briefly returning to the ruins of Tamacon to shoot the final landscape shots for the documentary, The crew spent the next few months pinpointing the psychiatric wards where the village survivors had been unwillingly admitted. Even though they knew they were strict institutions that wouldn't allow a camera in, they had hoped to track down one of the former staff members that could shed some light on the events that had transpired during the winter of 1998. Much like their previous experience, the crew had a hard time finding someone willing to talk about the murders. We knew it was a long shot the moment Diego suggested it, recalled screenwriter Salvador Moreno, but we were short of any other alternatives. We had no way of reaching out to the survivors, and the cops sure as hell weren't going to speak to us. Unless we wanted to go full fiction on this film, we needed to interview someone who was either related to the murders or who had contact with someone who had been. To be honest, we actually came very close to go in a completely different direction with the entire project. And now, I wish we had. Before they had the chance to consider that different approach, the film unit's production manager, Lucas Pascal, was contracted by a peculiar man with a strange accent. He told me he had worked as a security guard at Santa Lucia during '98, explained Pascal. Santa Lucia was one of the 9 hospitals that had come up during our investigation. Naturally, we were pretty excited about interviewing the guy, but at the same time, we were also prepared to be completely disappointed. We weren't exactly sure what kind of information we'd get from him. Some suspected he was only trying to scam us. We only found out he was for real when he demanded that his name was anonymous, and that his face was blurred out in the final cut. This is a small audio clip, as from the interview done that day.
How long were you a security guard at the hospital?
I worked in Santa Lucia for 9 years.
And when did you quit?
I didn't. I was fired.
Why, may I ask? May I ask why they were to let you go?
They told me I talked too much.
About what?
Oh, all sorts of things. Being a security guard can get really boring sometimes, even in a loony bin. When something interesting happens, you have to talk about it. But if I had to guess, what really pissed them off was when I told a couple of compadres about the shady stuff that happened during the winter of '98.
Care to elaborate?
Sure. That's the point of this interview, right? I guess it all started when the police brought in this crazy old bastardo from the south. The guy looked like your run-of-the-mill nut right off the bat. The cops had literally dragged him in, kicking and screaming, inside the hospital. I didn't make much of it though. I'd seen it 1,000 times. But then, something weird happened. This detective showed up the following day. Not just any detective, mind you. No, this guy was an Americano. I'd never seen his kind before, maybe except in the movies. Looked like a real hard-ass too, all dressed up and looking sharp. He even wore a hat. But there was something strange about his eyes, blue and hollow. I don't think I'd ever seen anything like that before. I mean, I'd seen blue eyes, but this was different.
What was he doing there?
He wanted to ask the old drunk a few questions in private. They even got a room just for him. After 5 minutes, though, the crazy old bastardo started screaming like I'd never heard a grown man scream before. The doctors and nurses rushed in, and the Americano disappeared in the middle of the commotion. I never saw him again, but the drunk, crazy old bastardo didn't stop screaming until the nurses finally put him to sleep. It made my blood curdle. I'd never heard anyone scream like that before. And then things got quiet for a while. Obviously, there was a lot of gossip going around. Everyone had their own story about how the Americano managed to frighten the old bastardo so much. Some say he showed him a picture. Others say that he whispered something in his ear. Nobody knew for certain, not even the doctors. And a week later, nobody seemed to really care. That is, of course, until they found the old drunk's body lying in a garden.
Was he murdered?
Looked like it. Officially, they labeled it as a suicide on account that he had overdosed on antidepressants. But that story didn't stick.
Why not?
Because the guy wasn't allowed to leave his room. They kept him locked away tight, restrained too. He couldn't have escaped without help, let alone get his hands on prescription meds. It was all too suspicious.
So you're saying that someone must have set the whole thing up?
Exactly. At the same time, though, you've got to ask yourself, who would do such a thing? Why go through the trouble of killing an old man? What did he do to deserve it? Maybe he saw something he shouldn't have. Maybe he didn't have a choice. Supplied with more questions than answers, the crew's ever-growing curiosity fueled them to attempt to track down the strange American detective. "This is the part where things started to get very strange," said Del Carmo. "We found out that Santa Lucia's wasn't the only place where people had seen the detective. Anyway, our sources confirmed that this guy had been seen all over the country, and he wasn't alone. It turned out that a whole army of Yankees in black suits had come over from the States. We knew that they were definitely onto something. That's around the time Paz Vega escaped from Coronel Martin. The psychiatric hospital of Coronel Martin was one of the most infamous military hospitals in South America. Every time a patient managed to escape, the story made national headlines. Paz Vega's flight was no different, being the only teenager who survived the murders in Tamucan. Vega's escape became one of the most talked about subjects in Argentina. The media made her look like some dangerous madwoman, recalled Moreno, like she was out for blood or something. The police were desperate to find her. I had never seen so many cops out on the street. We tried to track her down too, but it was useless. We didn't have the resources or the manpower. After a few weeks, though, the whole thing died down. The cops never found her. Without any more leads or cooperative interviewees, the crew decided to shift their focus towards the past history of Tamucan. What they found was nothing short of disturbing. We found that the place was some kind of haven for pagan rituals and god worship, revealed De Sosa. Freaks from all over the world would go there to offer sacrifices to their strange gods. All sorts of creepy stuff. After we found all that out, a lot of people decided to jump ship, myself included. Money was starting to get tight too, so it seemed like the logical thing to do. But Diego wouldn't let go. He wanted to find everything out. He wanted to see the whole thing through. Diego Silva, the project's director, had become completely obsessed with the murders of Tamucan. So much, in fact, that even when all of his crewmates had gone their separate ways, did he put a stop to his manic research, which eventually led him to leave the country. "The last time I heard from him, he was headed to Italy," said Pascal. "Something about tracking down Paz Vega's last known relatives. I remember thinking it was a waste of time. Even if he did manage to find out where he lived, the Yankees probably got in there already, but Diego didn't care. He couldn't be reasoned with. He was past salvation. After boarding a cheap flight to Naples, Diego Silva wasn't seen anywhere for over 12 years. His sudden disappearance did not go unnoticed. Both family members and close friends alike flew to the filmmaker's last known whereabouts in a desperate attempt to find him. Unfortunately, the 26-year-old Argentinian from Buenos Aires left no trace. It was only on the morning of the 22nd of March in 2015 that he would be heard from again. And Gabriela del Carmo received a strange letter in her mail. Inside were 3 sheets of toilet paper covered in faded writing. Due to the poor quality of the ink and rushed nature of the handwriting, a large portion of what was written remains undecipherable. A rough transcript of the message, with some parts added in based on logic and conjecture, reads as follows. My dearest Gabriela, men in white coats are about to do something to my brain. They're about to give me a lobotomy. It's all for the best. However, leaving Argentina was a mistake. The doctors tell me that I probably won't be the same after the operation. They say I'll forget all about my friends and family. And as much as that saddens me, I'm glad they're doing it. I know it sounds cliché, but I can no longer live with what I know. I never did find the girl, but I did find what happened at Tamakan. Not all of it, but parts, and I wish I hadn't. It's so much worse than what we thought. For once, they were right to hide something from us. Please, take care of yourself, and tell the others that I'm okay. Don't try to find me. Don't go back to Tamakan. They're not all dead. With no mention of a place or any other means discerning his exact location, all that Del Carmo could do was to share the contents of the message with Silva's family and former crewmates, nimbly neglecting to mention his last sentence. Yet as distressing as it was to read Silva's cryptic message, Del Carmo couldn't help but have a strong urge to revisit the footage they shot during their trip to the fishing village. After reading the letter, it felt like we missed something while we were there, she said. There was something about that last sentence that made my skin crawl. Del Carmo went on to re-watch the footage several times, but it was only after she digitally enhanced some of the wide shots of the village's waterfront that she noticed something odd. Back then, we were all so focused on examining the burnt houses for clues, but we didn't pay attention to what was in the skies, she confessed. Upon carefully analysing one of the shots, Del Carmo noticed a small black dot in the background, hovering across the sky. Unlike digital video, which has a set number of pixels, when you enhance film, you can actually zoom in on certain areas without affecting the level of detail. When I zoomed in, I discovered that this was a disc-shaped object far into the distance. A discovery that brought her to a disturbing conclusion. Whatever happened to those villages back in '98, I think it's safe to assume that they weren't just murdered. After her interview, Del Carmo agreed to provide a copy of the shot so that it could be further examined by experts. Before she had a chance to do so, however, our sources report that she went missing after receiving a visit from a well-dressed man with pale blue eyes and a North American accent.